we are approaching the 100K for Bitcoin. Right now, we saw like a slight pullback from the all-time high, but I'm pretty sure that we're gonna get back there. By the time we will publish the video, probably we might have already reached the 100K. So what do you think is the significance of this benchmark for Bitcoin?
Yeah, so 100,000 or 0.1 M, it's sort of a psychological barrier, much in the same way as 10,000 was a barrier, and 1,000 was a barrier, and 100 was a barrier. So I think once we pass 100,000, it's just smooth sailing up to 1 million. And it shows that Bitcoin has that growth potential. So once you cross that threshold into the 100,000 range, I think it's going to first accelerate. So Bitcoin's growth trajectory is not going to be, growing at 1,000 every couple of days or dropping by 1,000, but you'll start to go up by 10,000 a day or drop by 10,000 a day. And this is the God candle. And after that, we'll start to see omega candles, which are 100,000 increments daily. So post 100K, that's when things start to heat up and it starts to accelerate. You're further along that steep exponential growth curve.
And now let's get to the potential catalysts that could spark that sort of massive growth that you are talking about. Can you just briefly explain what hyperbitcoinization is and why we may be near to that scenario?
We are very near hyperbitcoinization. So the definition hyperbitcoinization is a parallel of sorts to hyperinflation. It's the point at which we no longer need to convert Bitcoin back to fiat currencies like the dollar or yen, simply because there's no need to. Everyone is using Bitcoin, and most importantly, everyone only wants Bitcoin. So with money, it's typically a zero-sum game. You don't really want an inferior money unless there's a direct need for it. But generally, people want to keep their savings or store value, if they're using fiat currencies, in the strongest vehicle of fiat currencies, which typically right now is the US dollar. But hyperbitcoinization will just be the point at which Bitcoin replaces the dollar, and nobody wants to take the dollar anymore. They want sats for payment.
And why do you think are we so close to that sort of scenario?
Well, there's a number of factors. The current legacy system is failing. If you look at the fracturing of solidarity of the US dollar, you can see the BRICS countries are starting to migrate away. More trade is being done with the Chinese yuan. And most importantly, you can see the US debt is spiraling out of control. We are at $36 trillion right now. Back when your grandparents were, going out to party, they were paying 15 cents for a hamburger. But now you're $36 trillion in debt. So there's a very big problem right now, and most people don't recognize the scale of that problem, but that debt is unlikely to be paid off. Even with Doge or Department of Government Efficiency, there's only so much you can do to trim the fat and to optimize and cost cut. But I think ultimately it's not going to have much effect because the spending is still there. And more importantly, the interest on that debt is compounding. And interest is a miracle. It's a miracle if you're, in the black, but it's the opposite of a miracle, or it's a big curse when you're in the red.
There is one company, MicroStrategy, which is sort of leading the path on this. What is the significance of MicroStrategy in the process of hyperbitcoinization?
Well, the biggest thing that MicroStrategy and Michael Saylor is doing is that they are creating demand for Bitcoin. So I view the ETFs as a legitimization of Bitcoin as an asset class. And they are also a major source of demand. Demand for Bitcoin from the ETFs alone is multiples each day of supply. But MicroStrategy sort of adds gasoline on that fire by creating this Bitcoin reactor, which they can take corporate debt and corporate equity and convert that to Bitcoin, price at a much higher multiple in the future, and effectively pay zero interest rate for that. So they're sort of an accelerant on this fire that's already burning for Bitcoin.
And I guess they are also sort of giving an example to what nation states could do. They are running at a company level what certain nation states could do on a state level. Am I correct?
Yes, that's correct. But I believe the nation state path is also going to follow the same model, both as a reserve asset, but also as a MicroStrategy type play. And I view the Bitcoin bonds that I helped to architect as this sort of MicroStrategy play for nation states. And we do see more and more interest coming back to Bitcoin bonds because it makes perfect sense to issue sovereign debt, which is superior in many ways to corporate debt, to acquire Bitcoin for a strategic reserve or to build a mining operation. Right now, I would say the nation-state Bitcoin developments are very much centered on the US, especially with the election of Trump once again, and the talk of creation of this Bitcoin strategic reserve in the US. So I think this is a catalyst for more change and more adoption of Bitcoin around the world, simply because most people are looking to follow somebody. They don't really want to be the first. El Salvador was the first nation state to really adopt Bitcoin in a meaningful way. But I think it's a small country and they're not being looked at as the meter stick to measure and to decide what to do. Much in the same way as the ETFs. So the ETFs, the US kind of led the way there. Everyone was waiting for approval in the US before they greenlit their own ETFs. And you saw that with the US ETFs coming online and then the Hong Kong ones and then the Australian ones. They're very much watching and waiting. And I think it's the same for meaningful Bitcoin adoption, such as creation of a Bitcoin strategic reserve. But there's already talk at the state level of a few states trying to create it before it's created at the federal level. And I believe this is also prompting more countries around the world to start really sitting down and trying to break down what they need to do and put together a plan.
This idea of creating a strategic reserve is still pretty blurred. Trump mentioned it during the conference back in the summer, but he was just very generic in describing this. Then we had the Bitcoin Act proposed by Senator Loomis, which is a bit more specific, and it's about buying a certain amount of Bitcoin in a certain time frame and essentially hold it for the next, I believe, 20 years or something in order to cover a certain amount of the national debt. What is your view? How that should look like?
Well, it is decently well defined, I think, in the bill, but at a high level, they committed to stop selling any seized Bitcoin that they have, and there is a plan to purchase. Now, the details of that purchase execution is not really set, but I think that is not something that can be decided until once the bill has really been passed. And the timeline has also been more or less outlined. They want to create a reserve of 1 million Bitcoin. I think Bobby Kennedy was talking about 4 million Bitcoin, but 1 million is still attainable, I think, for the US. But it is going to be very expensive simply because of the MicroStrategy Bitcoin reactor consuming so much Bitcoin fuel in the next few months with their deployment of $42 billion. So it remains to be seen at which price the US will buy at and what their average cost will be. But I just know that things are definitely heating up, and it seems like it will happen because it has to happen.
And so what is your time frame for this? When do you expect this bill to be passed into law?
Well, I'm hopeful that it will be passed in the first 100 days because it is a very critical piece of legislation, and it is time is of the essence, simply because as more countries decide to front run the US, then you compound that with ETF demand, and you compound that with MicroStrategy demand and other corporations, and it just becomes very likely that the price is going to be very expensive if they wait too long. So I definitely think it's better sooner than later.
In case this plays out as you said, next year we'll see a huge spike in Bitcoin price, because if they move on with this, then we have other countries jumping in. The appreciation we saw in 2024 would probably look very little compared to what we're going to see in 2025.
Yeah, I think 2025 is going to be the year of the Omega candle and the year of 1 million Bitcoin.
Now I have like just a couple of concerns. What would be the rationale for the US government to implement something like that? Because at the end of the day, the US dollar at the moment is the global reserve currency. Trump has always been a staunch defender of the US dollar dominance. And so why would he play against the US dollar and accelerate its demise by accepting Bitcoin?
Yeah, that's an interesting way to look at it. Does Bitcoin prolong the life of the dollar or does it kill it? I think it can prolong the life of the dollar a little bit, but ultimately all fiat currencies will fail. And this is just because we will gravitate as a civilization to the hardest form of money and the best form of money. So, yes, adoption of Bitcoin and building a strategic Bitcoin reserve does strengthen the position short term of the US and by extension the US dollar. But long term, it doesn't really matter. It's just maybe prolonging the life of the dollar for another 5 years, maybe. But as the world moves to a Bitcoin standard, you simply just don't want a fiat currency. Just like today, if I offered you payment for something in seashells, you'd be like, no, I'll take some fiat currency. You don't want the seashells as money. Maybe to decorate your room, but not to store value in for sure.
The adoption of Bitcoin as a reserve currency in the US could really lead to a massive appreciation in this asset, and so to the enrichment of a relatively small amount of people who are like Bitcoin hodlers. Are you not afraid that this move would just exacerbate inequality?
Well, inequality is a very difficult topic. The only way to make people equal is to seize assets from one group and pass them out to another group. And historically, that has not ended very well. So I think we have to accept that there will be an imbalance. I think that's a better word of wealth distribution, because much like any change in dynamics of society and technology, there's always a set of early adopters that benefit the most. But having wealthy Bitcoiners is not necessarily a bad thing, because I think Bitcoiners as a group would finance many things that are beneficial for society and for civilization. So it's just a question of where do you want the wealth to be concentrated? Would it be the wealthy people that have printed money and can continue to print at an accelerating pace, or a new set of people with a strong ethos for sound money and with a low time preference, and with a thinking to better the world? I think I would go with the latter.
Now, just a final question regarding another benchmark that you were talking about lately. There could be a time when Bitcoin market cap will equate the market cap of gold, and you see this moment as sort of milestone which will bring immense change. Why do you think that benchmark, the equality of the Bitcoin market cap and the market cap of gold, is so significant?
Because Bitcoin and gold are very similar, both things are valuable because we ascribe value to them. Our understanding of gold it's been valuable for a very long time, thousands of years. And now we have this thing called Bitcoin, which has grown up in just 15 years, and it's now seeming to be on the track to overtake gold. So I think at some point the masses have to start to understand that there is a change coming. And I would say maybe it was the previous gold market cap or half the market cap of current gold market cap. So maybe about 400,000 per Bitcoin would be that threshold, I think. So let's call that the Veblen threshold. Once you cross that line, then I think people that hold gold are going to see, like, this thing that I'm watching in my rearview mirror is approaching very rapidly. Do I still want to have these bars of gold that I can't really easily verify or move? Or do I want this digital gold that's teleportable and verifiable by a Raspberry Pi? I think you start to question that at that 400,000 mark or a 0.4 M mark. And then you start to have people selling gold and moving funds into Bitcoin.
I guess we're gonna see it next year. It sounds like we're gonna see many exciting things happening and a lot of bold expectations. We're gonna see how things will play out. Samson, it was a pleasure to have you on our show.
Awesome. Thanks, Giovanni.